Sponsored by the Retail Energy Supply Association, RESA. Retail Choice in 2021, celebrating Pennsylvania's 25th anniversary. My name is Tracy McCormick, and I'm the Executive Director of RESA. Today, we're holding a panel discussion designed to provide an education on the history and involvement of the Pennsylvania retail energy choice market and retail market enhancement initiatives. We'd like to take a moment to introduce today's panelists. Our first will be our moderator and keynote speaker, Rob Powelson. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Water Companies. Prior to joining the Association of Water Companies, Rob served as a Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner. Powelson was nominated to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission by President Donald Trump in May of 2017 and confirmed by the U.S. Senate on August 7th of 2017. Commissioner Powelson came to FERC from the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, where he served since June of 2008 and led as chairman from February 24th, 2011 to May 7th, 2015. Under Chairman Powelson's leadership, Pennsylvania ratepayers have had an active voice on issues such as nuclear power production, renewable investment, broadband deployment, infrastructure development, unaccounted for water, cybersecurity, and a choice in selecting their retail energy provider. Panelist Todd Stewart, Esquire. He's a partner at Hawk McKeon, and Todd's practice is focused on those who generate, sell, deliver, and purchase energy, including producers of energy, renewable energy, competitive retail suppliers of electricity and natural gas, infrastructure providers, and the transmission and distribution utilities that ultimately deliver the energy to consumers. Todd represents clients before the PAPUC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and other state and federal agencies. Todd also represents these clients before the Pennsylvania General Assembly and as a registered lobbyist, and represents the Retail Energy Supply Association in natural gas competition related matters before the PAPUC. Dan Mumford. Dan has served as director of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission's Office of Competitive Market Oversight since April of 2016. This office calls upon a designated group of legal, technical, and policy staff members from various commission bureaus and offices to informally address obstacles faced by suppliers in participating in the retail market, and is responsible for responding to questions from stakeholders regarding the competitive retail market, monitoring issues hindering the development of market, and facilitating informal dispute resolution between utilities and suppliers. Mr. Mumford has served with the PUC since 1990 in various roles involving consumer protection and competitive markets. Christina Montgomery. She is the Director of Retail Policy at Vistra Corp, a leading Fortune 275 integrated retail electricity and power generating company. Christina is based in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and is responsible for regulatory policy and advocacy for RESA's competitive retail business throughout the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. She also serves as chair of the Retail Energy Association's Maryland, Delaware, and District of Columbia Advocacy Group. Christina holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry and economics from Cornell University. Rich Spilkey. He is a principal retail analytic at Constellation with a career spanning 30 years in the retail energy industry. Richard helps customers, legislators, and regulatory bodies navigate the densely complex regulatory landscape of retail and wholesale power markets across the country. Richard's solution-oriented drive and inherent understanding of how policy impacts energy markets has made him a trusted advocate for retail customers and a trusted resource for policymakers. Tony Casati. Mr. Casati is Director of Regulatory Affairs for IGS Energy and Chairman of the Pennsylvania Caucuses of the Retail Energy Supply Association. Tony is responsible for all regulatory and legislative initiatives for IGS Energy, for restructured states on the East Coast for retail energy markets. Prior to joining IGS in January of 2008, Tony was with Commerce Energy and ACN Energy from 2000 to 2007 and held similar positions in the regulatory department before engaging in the retail energy business. Tony spent 20 years in the healthcare finance industry, where he held positions ranging from staff accountant to CFO of a multinational for-profit hospital management company. And today we wanted to let you know that the comments and content expressed in this webinar represent the position of the Retail Energy Supply Association, RESA, as an organization, but may not represent the views of any particular member of the association. Founded in 1990, RESA is a broad and diverse group of retail energy suppliers dedicated to promoting efficient, sustainable, and customer-oriented competitive retail energy markets. RESA members operate throughout the United States, delivering value-added electricity and natural gas service at retail to residential, commercial, and industrial energy customers. For more information, please look to our website at www.resausa.org. And now we would like to hear from former Chairman Powelson as our moderator and keynote speaker. Rob.
Well, good afternoon, Tracy, and thank you for the kind introduction and the opportunity to join you all today to celebrate this milestone accomplishment for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. You know, I like to start by saying that the Pennsylvania Retail Choice Act is a national success story. Now, I know some at the Wall Street Journal these days may argue with that, but the fact remains that Pennsylvania is really the shining light to the north when it comes to electric and gas retail choice. It's important to remember that this success story could not have happened without the incredible work of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. I remember the countless hours spent by the commission dating back to the passage of the act under then Governor Tom Ridge and Chairman John Quain and his colleagues, Nora Brownell, John Hanger, Bob Bloom. And to my experience working with a dear colleague, Chairman Jim Cawley, Commissioner Kim Pizzangrilli, Commissioner Wayne Gardner. And you know, let me just say, in this spirited political environment that we're in, the one thing I take great pride in during my career is the fact that all of this was done in the spirit of bipartisanship, and it was a total team effort where we all checked our egos at the door. And believe me, some of us have very big egos, but we rolled up our sleeves and we worked together, and we came out with really a unified work product. By the way, that work product doesn't happen without the incredible work of the professional staff at the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. You're going to hear from Dan Mumford here, who runs our Office of Competitive Market Oversight. I think I remember him very well from when we had the conversation about starting this office and the importance of having OCMO in place and working with suppliers to provide not only the legislature peace of mind that the commission was on top of this emerging market, that we were going to stand out in providing consumer protections and develop pathways forward for robust retail choice. I also would be remiss in not recognizing our former chief counsel, Buck Panque, and Bob Young, and others in the Law Bureau and the work that they had undertaken dating back to Chairman Quain's era all the way up to when I was chairman. Rosemary Chiavetta, our secretary, June Perry, our head of our legislative affairs office, and mentioned Dan, and Tom Charles, our Office of Communications. You know, people think about this in the context of, you know, bringing choice to customers in Pennsylvania, but not realizing there was a lot of infrastructure that needed to be built. And I think we did it both regulatorily, and we also, from a marketing and communications perspective, what I like to say, borrow at it and adapt it from other jurisdictions. And you look at what we've been able to do with the very robust shopping website, both on the gas and electric side. I think that really makes it easy for customers to go to and understand their options. Now, listen, some will argue that we had a few missteps along the way and that electric competition was a complete failure. I don't echo those sentiments. I am very bullish on where these markets are headed, the value proposition, both on the wholesale and retail side, in terms of how customers, industrial, C&I, and residential customers have benefited from these markets. You know, it was a few years back, I had the opportunity to attend the National RISA meeting in San Antonio, Texas. The keynote speaker was my good friend, Mayo Shattuck, the chairman of Exelon Corporation. And Mayo talked about the power of retail competition, the power of really competitive markets. But one thing he said that stays true today is we often get caught in the trap of using the word deregulated. And really, ladies and gentlemen, we're not deregulated. We're highly regulated. There are rules of engagement for retail competition and retail providers in these markets. You know, it's not the wild, wild west as some would like to portray it. And I take that to heart because I know there's a lot of things going on right now in these markets. The Wall Street Journal has certainly lost touch with the fact that they should be standing up for these markets. But the reality today is there are customers in Pennsylvania in real dollars that are paying less for power today than they were prior to electric competition being passed and signed into law. And I think we have to look at the facts. Prior to electric competition being passed in Pennsylvania, retail customers were captive monopoly customers. In fact, let's go back. If I go back to the 90s, electric utilities used to refer to consumers as ratepayers. My, has that changed? Ratepayers have now become consumers. And those consumers obviously have choice and many choices in Pennsylvania. But prior to the passage of the act, let's not forget the old too cheap to meter narrative. And then, you know, the fact that we had a number of uneconomic resources, the pancaking of rate cases. And I think what it led to under Governor Tom Ridge's courageous leadership and the Pennsylvania General Assembly under my mentor, Speaker Matt Ryan, and Majority Leader Joe Loper, we were able, like the great state of Texas, to move forward and embark on this journey. By the way, it's amazing to think back, it's 25 years to the day. And what we learned from that experience, going back over many different business cycles, is that when we deregulated or restructured, it's amazing how the generation fleet became more efficient. OpEx and CapEx became a science, and value engineering became a regular part of the engineering conversation. And as a result, we look at Pennsylvania benefiting by saving millions of dollars year over year from more efficient, cleaner generation resources that are now part of the grid today. And, you know, I looked at back over just some of the trend lines within the PJM footprint. And, you know, you've got to put this in context of what Pennsylvania was able to do in 2008 with the passage of Act 129. And then prior to that, in 2004, with the passage of the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards, to see where Pennsylvania is today in its investment and commitment to clean energy resources on the grid is truly remarkable. I think it's something like 3,000 megawatts of installed renewable capacity on the grid just here in Pennsylvania. And now we have customers that can go out in the market and procure an all green resource. It's truly amazing, and it speaks to the power of these competitive markets. Now, one of the things that we've argued time and time again is that after the expiration of rate caps, we came out of that market, believe it or not, when natural gas was at $14 per MMBTU. And it was a very trying time. In fact, many at that point thought that competitive markets were a failure. And then you move forward to the development of the Marcellus Shale, where we were able to really cut the cord on Gulf Coast basis pricing and move more towards a Northeast Henry Hub of the North, basically in the Williamsport area, and where gas purchase cost, if I recall, in Pennsylvania, and probably continued to drop precipitously. By the way, a direct pass-through savings to customers, and market volatility that has now gone away because we're able to locally source abundant, clean natural gas. Another success story that continues to unfold, and it's really led to the industrial revolution, or the industrial investment of things like ethylene crackers and other massive manufacturing capabilities coming back to Pennsylvania. By the way, let's not forget, in 1996, Pennsylvania rates were 15% above the national average. Today, the average Pennsylvania commercial electricity rate is 20% lower than the national average, coming in around 8.36 cents per kilowatt hour. And that is a trend line that we often overlook, but it also leads into the competitive landscape of Pennsylvania's economic development opportunities in attracting companies here. Let's face it, competition has brought substantial benefits to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, both in absolute terms and relative terms to other states. Just having competition in Pennsylvania has made incumbent utilities better in terms of their outreach to customers and providing a backstop with default service. Now, I'm not a big fan of default service. I think it's fair to say we had that debate. We probably need to continue to have that debate. But what's happened in Pennsylvania that needed to happen as we restructured the markets and invested and put policies forth to support transmission and distribution assets. Pennsylvania now has an expanded DISC mechanism where we have applied the application of long-term infrastructure plans for our utilities to invest in things like smart meters, upgrading of the grid and transmission assets. That's a remarkable success story. And on the other side of the ledger, we've brought to bear the competitive forces of retail choice. So the two can work hand in hand. I think it's important that we continue to support our regulated utilities, both gas and electric, and obviously my industry of water and wastewater, continue to, as the commission has done under our current chairwoman, Gladys Brown Dutrell, and others before me, is setting forth those regulatory recovery mechanisms for utilities to invest. But on the retail competition side, I think the fact remains that we need to empower customers to go out and shop. Now let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the PJM marketplace and how important it has been to the delivery of a reliable, affordable wholesale power in the market. I know there's a raging debate right now with the events that have unfolded in Texas, and I'm not going to get into an argument or a debate because I have very good relationships in Texas. And I think it's fair to say that a reliability pricing model in Pennsylvania, it's a great concept, it's worked, but it too has had its issues. And so we've seen the evolution of the PJM model. We've seen a tremendous amount of investment, something like 42,000 megawatts of new capacity installed in the market since 2008. What does that tell me? That we're having orderly entry and exit of inefficient resources. Low cost energy is being brought to bear through an auction process. And we have developed a reliability pricing model that delivers strong reserve margins to get through events like a polar vortex, a derecho, Hurricane Sandy, and the like. But it hasn't come without a number of different flashpoints throughout that time. And another important thing to mention in this conversation as we look to our robust wholesale power markets here in PJM is the fact that we have a debate right now and moving forward in a very proactive way in entering the Paris Climate Agreement again, is the fact that within the PJM footprint, going back to 2005, CO2 emissions have dropped by about 34%. That's an amazing success story. That all happened without the backdrop of a hard price on carbon. That tells me that market-based decarbonization is happening across the PJM footprint. And that's a good thing, not only for the environment, but it's also a good thing for new entrants that want to invest in the PJM footprint. And by the way, since 2011, mercury has decreased by over 90%. So in lieu of a hard price on carbon, I think it's a great success story in how wholesale power markets are evolving. And you look at states like New Jersey now looking at huge investments in offshore wind. You know, when I was a FERC commissioner, we passed the battery storage NOPR, and now we're going to see a tectonic shift in the PJM footprint around energy storage resources and the role that energy storage plays in capacity markets. So the fact remains that we've learned a lot of valuable lessons dating back to 1996. And, you know, I have to say this, when I was a lonely FERC commissioner, and there was this whole notion by the Department of Energy to move forward with what we called the DOE NOPR. I used to call it the DOA NOPR in speeches, called Dead on Arrival, was a really misguided policy. And I'm very proud of the leadership that my colleagues at the FERC showed in taking courageous action to say, let's take a pause, let's have a conversation around overall grid resiliency, but please, let's not sacrifice or bastardize competitive markets and really create a lot of moral hazards by doing bailouts. And I am so glad that we stayed the course, because left unexamined and unchecked, the Department of Energy NOPR would have undermined billions of dollars of private capital investment across the PJM footprint. Fingers crossed that Team 888, my wife read my speech, she goes, Team 888. I go, well, that's my handle for the FERC headquarter address. Team 888, under my good friend, Chairman Rich Glick, and before him, Chairman Neil Chatterjee, that PJM maintains its independence and supports competition policy going forward. And I remain absolutely bullish that that will be the case. Now, if you hearken back to a few recent events, I remember my good friend, the CEO of NRG, Mauricio Gutierrez, mentioned to this audience that technology is starting to enable customers to take ownership of their energy usage. And that is so true today. You know, today customers have access to smart thermostats. By the way, this device here, as we know, we can go on the PA Power Switch website, sign up for a retail energy supply contract, but we can also manage our energy usage through smart thermostats here in our home. And I think it's important when you look at where Pennsylvania has evolved, dating back to the passage of the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard, the fact that in Pennsylvania today, that customers have the ability to install rooftop solar, combined heat and power systems, and not to mention the evolution of real-time pricing options behind the meter. And you overlay that with the success of Act 129, our statewide energy efficiency measure, it's no wonder that more than close to 2 million customers in Pennsylvania are purchasing from the competitive power providers. And that's a great story. And I know Dan's going to talk a little bit about that here in his presentation. For now, I think it's critically important that we recognize, and I know we have some legislative staffers on the call who do a remarkable job in our state capitol, that they understand that this market has been battle tested, but this market has rules and regulations thanks to the work of the Public Utility Commission. And, you know, we've had a raging debate going back to the infamous polar vortex of 2014, where we almost had in Pennsylvania, we had a potential curtailment due to due to lack of power that was available on the grid during a peak period. And, you know, we learned a valuable lesson through that experience. First of all, we learned that there are customers that certainly did not have the risk appetite or the risk tolerance to be on variable rate products. We took a heroic effort working with the Independent Regulatory Review Commission, the IRC, in passing an emergency order, which Dan and his team were instrumental in getting passed at the IRC. I mean, I think we did that in warp speed, putting new rules around switching, putting new rules around disclosures on variable rate products. And I think that at the end of the day was a huge game changer in providing confidence to consumers that if they did have the risk appetite, they did have the risk tolerance, that rather than ban variable rates, we allowed customers to go out and we built new regs and new safeguards to protect those customers. Now, I get it. The recent events in Texas provide evidence that these markets are not flawless. If you had to tell me back in 2014 what a polar vortex was, I would not have known that weather pattern. But what I learned, again, is a 22% forced outage rate in PJM was something no one could fathom. Luckily, we averted a major grid crisis, but the fact of the matter is there was fallout from the wholesale side and obviously a fallout on the retail side. And again, I mentioned the efforts taken by the proactive efforts by the commission, but we also forced PJM to adopt a capacity performance model to say, never again will we allow grid operators that have capacity obligations to not show up on the grid and then walk away from those obligations without fines and penalties for non-performance. And we also worked hand in hand with the generators to get past the capacity performance construct. And I think that's a great success story because it was a crisis. We recognize that, but we came through it with very good regs and a greater respect for how these markets work. You know, as the great John Hanger once said, you can drive 80 miles an hour on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and that's why we have state troopers. That same holds true today. That same edict holds true today with our retail competitive markets. It's a 25-year success story that's only going to get better. And the big question for all of us here today is how do we protect and how do we strengthen these markets to ensure that customers continue to reap the benefits of competition policy? The fact is, Pennsylvania has done the most among the Northeast states, if not the entire 2/3 of the country where we have competitive power markets, to support these markets. Consumers obviously want access to new technologies that drive energy savings in their homes and businesses. We recognize that. And consumers will not ignore these technologies just because the regulatory framework doesn't allow them to support them. We learned a valuable lesson, again, from the polar vortex, that smart meters that take 30 to 45 days to allow customers to switch is absolute nonsense. And we had to, unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, we had to move forward in an expeditious manner to get switching down to a 3-day. Although I wanted to follow Texas in that lead with instantaneous switch, we were able to get a great compromise in 3-day business switching. So let me conclude by saying, as a recovering regulator, I'm fully aware that customers want to make energy decisions that are effortless, fast, and remarkably efficient. I also want to have peace of mind that the product I'm signing up for meets my value proposition and that behind that product, I have a financially solvent provider, and that if I do have a problem, they have peace of mind that the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, through the Office of Competitive Market Oversight and the Bureau of Consumer Services, that they have somewhere to turn if there is a crisis. So again, it's great to join today with my colleagues and my friends in the retail energy supply business to not only celebrate this accomplishment, but to look ahead and to see where we can really continue to harness robust retail choice. Tracy, thank you. And Tony, thank you for this opportunity. And I now look forward to our panel presentation. Our first presenter this afternoon will be my good friend, and by the way, no stranger to the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, but he was introduced earlier. My good friend Todd Stewart, partner with Hawk and McEwen. And Todd, I'm going to recognize you to kickstart our panel today.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to put my screen up here for everyone to see, so you can see my slides. Can everyone see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to get started. Rob covered some of the things I was going to talk about today, and Rob, you are a tough act to follow. I'm going to tell you that right now, but I'll try to keep this rather dry history as exciting as I possibly can. The first thing we should know about electric restructuring is that in 1996, when the law was passed, as Rob said, Pennsylvanians were paying on average about 15% more than the national average for electricity, which is pretty high. The electric industry in Pennsylvania was a $10 billion a year industry, and the unemployment rate in Pennsylvania in 1996 was 6%. So you can imagine that job creation was at the top of the legislative priority list in 1996. One example that I would like to point out, and this is way before 1996, but it just shows the extent to which industry would go to try to get lower rates. Luken Steel, a company in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, actually tried to buy a PPL distribution line so that they could receive power from PPL rather than from PECO, because PPL's rates were lower than PECO's. And that was in 1983. The Lukens lost it before the commission and the Commonwealth Court, but it's really just a demonstration of the sort of the desperation of the industries in Pennsylvania trying to get lower rates. And then in 1995, sort of we'll just move forward a little bit here for a moment. The conversation changed from the industrial customers in particular, from how do we get the Public Utility Commission and the utilities to lower their rates, to can we have access to that wholesale market and buy our power from the wholesale market? And that was really the fundamental paradigm shift that competition represents in Pennsylvania, which is that we're not going to talk about vertically integrated utilities. We're going to talk about customers buying directly from the wholesale market. And that's really what we're talking about. But we have to sort of back up if you want to really get the true history of re-regulation in Pennsylvania, or for restructuring really is the best word. And it goes back to, I think, 1965, when there was this big blackout in the northeastern United States that ultimately led to the formation of power pools like PJM. And Rob said, PJM has been really a national leader in competitive markets. Well, that grew out of this blackout in 1965, where they built more centralized control infrastructure that ultimately was the backbone for competition. So you have to sort of look to that far back to see the beginnings of competition and the interconnections that required it. And then if you look at in the 70s and through the 90s, even early 90s, there were a couple of federal acts that were passed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because they're not hugely important, but what they did, these two acts, PURPA and the Energy Policy Act of 1992, what they both did that's important for the wholesale market that we're talking about, is they allowed for the creation of legal entities that were not utilities that could connect to the grid and produce power that was being sold onto the grid. And so in the case of PURPA, it was qualifying facilities. And in the case of the Energy Policy Act of 1992, it was independent power producers. Or some of these were also called EWIGs because they were exempt from regulation under the Public Utility Holding Company Act. So, but I think the two big sea change regulations or changes in the law from a competitive markets perspective are FERC orders 888 and 889, and they were issued almost simultaneously in 1996. The 888, which happens to be the address of FERC, which is ironic and interesting. Order 888, the FERC required open access to wholesale transmission in the United States for all utilities, and that is critical. And then Order 889 provided for the brains, essentially the open access same time information systems that really ran the grid. And so this allowed for power to be wheeled from high cost areas to low cost areas, and really served to start leveling out the cost of electricity on a regional basis. And this is a world changer for the electric power industry. So now we get to actually talking a little bit about what eventually became the Electricity Generation Customer Choice and Competition Act, which was House Bill 1509, which was actually introduced by Representative Durham as a taxi cab bill of all things. But it was amended and passed in 1996. And the bill was a huge consensus bill. It was, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I just wanted to throw this slide in here so that you could see that where the bill started from. Pennsylvania was one of the states that was really at the national forefront of the competition movement. And with the passage of orders 888 and 889, I think it really kicked it into high gear. But the PUC had actually started an investigation a couple of years earlier, and issued a report in 1995 saying that electric competition was something that could happen. As Rob said, there was a group of a work group that was started in the legislature under the leadership of Senator Bell and PUC Chairman John Quain. And they worked for months to negotiate every aspect of the legislation that eventually became the act that we're here celebrating today. And the critical issues that they talked about were, some stuff that you probably recognize: stranded costs, impact on tax collection, whether we cap rates or whether we provide an immediate rate discount. All these issues were heavily debated, and probably no more than the stranded cost recovery mechanism. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But just so if you don't know what stranded costs are, that's the difference between what a utility spent on infrastructure that they had to have under a regulated market that they wouldn't necessarily be able to earn a return on or recover on in the competitive market. And most of this was generating assets or long-term power contracts that were that the utility might lose money on. So, and the stranded cost issue was a big issue that was hotly debated in the committee process. But by the time they got to the Senate floor, the bill was largely consensus. There were a few issues that were debated. The tax recovery was still an issue at that point, and a bunch of amendments were offered, including ones on tax recovery, rate cuts, and rate caps. None of the amendments that were offered during the Senate floor debate were actually adopted, and the bill passed largely intact from what it came out of the work group process, which was sort of amazing at that point. And if you look back at the legislative intent and read the legislative journal and talk to people who actually participated in the debate at the time, these are some of the issues that I think they all thought were important. And I think Rob touched on some of these too. Lower electric rates obviously were one of the most important issues that everybody in the legislature thought we were going to gain from the bill. But it was also important to make Pennsylvania more competitive. And that meant putting Pennsylvania out in front really at the very front on the national stage for electric competition. And I think the bill really did that. And I think another concept that was key was allowing the market to regulate prices and allowing customers access to that market. And then as we also know, allowing customers access to the varied products like renewables and other types of products that innovative products that suppliers are bringing to the market today. None of those would have been possible without this bill. And then once the bill passed, we have to talk a little bit about the implementation processes, because this is where the commission really rolled up its sleeves and did like immense amount of work in a very, very short period of time. Literally within months of passage of the bill, the commission had opened probably 20 dockets for issues that ranging from the timing of the restructuring filings to what supplier licensing requirements are going to be. And these dockets, these rulemaking proceedings went on at rocket speed, and really and amazingly, the commission, it was every resource they had was being thrown at getting this bill implemented, the statute implemented as quickly and efficiently as possible. And the commission did really heroic work in doing that. And then we got to the restructuring cases. And in 1996, I was an associate a newly minted associate at a law firm that represented MAPSA, who actually was the predecessor to RISA. And we participated in every one of the restructuring cases. And I can tell you that it was a lot of work, And when we finally got to the negotiations that resulted from the cases themselves were all litigated, fully litigated. The commission issued decisions and then they were appealed. Many of them were appealed, and then those appeals were resolved through negotiation. And some of those negotiations, literally, we were leaving the negotiation when the sun was coming up, especially when we resolved the PICO case. That was a long time ago. But anyway, the important part here is to take away from it that the restructuring cases was so universal that it touched everybody, every industry just about that had anything to do with electricity. So all those parties were participated had a voice, and the commission did a really great job of trying to balance all of that and all the interests at the end of the day. And then I want to come back to stranded costs, because I think this has implications for even for the market for today. In Pennsylvania, the two largest stranded cost amounts, as you can see here, PICO and PPL, together are over $8 billion in stranded costs. And the reason why stranded costs are important is because a stranded cost recovery affected the rate caps that were part of the statute. So if you had a big pot of money that you had to recover, the only way you could recover it was by extending the period over which you recovered it, because the rates were capped. And so the statute provided for a 9-year rate cap on generation rates. It ended up being more like 12 years for PICO and 11 years for PPL because of the amounts of stranded costs that they had to recover. So it really wasn't until almost 2010 that we had uncapped rates and fully competitive markets in Pennsylvania. Even though the markets were functioning before that and customers were engaging in the market and were saving money, there still was in part a cap on the rates that could be charged by the utilities, which also capped by default capped the rates that the suppliers could charge and still be competitive. And so I know that there's questions at the end, and I've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time, but I want to keep us on schedule. So if there's any questions about any of this thing, I'd be happy to talk to you about the end, and thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And it's great to have you join us here, and look forward to our Q&A. Our next presenter is someone who needs really no introduction. I teed it up in my keynote, but I want to recognize Dan Mumford, who's the director of the Office of Competitive Market Oversight, and applaud Dan for his incredible leadership at the commission, and look forward to his presentation here today. Dan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to discuss the current status of our competitive market. And my emphasis this afternoon is going to be on the consumer protection part, the safeguards we have put in place that Chairman Powelson has alluded to. I'll discuss in a little bit more detail here. Hopefully you're able to see my slides at this point.
Yes, we are, Dan. Thank you.
And again, yeah, we're marking 25 years. Over these 25 years, the commission has strived to create a vibrant competitive market while putting in place robust consumer protections that make this state a leader in competitive energy markets. And just where are we at when you look at the market today? Here's the percent of electric load that is being currently served by competitive suppliers. Residential, we're at 29%, commercial 58%, industrial 93%. Overall, just under 60% of our total electric load in this state is now being served by competitive suppliers. Now, you notice there is quite a variation there among customer classes, with the residential down just below 30%. And as you would expect, the larger customers, the commercials, industrials with their bigger electric loads, they're more apt to shop because simply, they have more incentive, more reason to shop because their financial gains are greater. But it is hoped that in the future, especially now that we have smart metering fully deployed in the state, that suppliers will be able to offer a greater variety of products to the residential segment that in the past they could only offer to the larger commercial and industrials. And what are these residential customers buying? When you look at the data, the biggest number of them by far, they're on very simple, basic fixed price products from suppliers. However, just under 400,000 are on some sort of time of use or variable price. And that last figure there, I think, is also very important to keep in mind, the number of customers on renewables. That represents 1 out of every 4 residential customers shopping are buying renewable products. And that is, more remarkable when you consider that renewables, as a general rule, tend to cost more than the other products and even more than the utility default service. Although those prices have been coming down in recent years, renewable products still tend to be a little bit pricier than conventional products. But still, regardless of that, they have proven very popular. And as you see, 1 out of every 4 customers are on renewable products at this point. Also, as Chairman Powelson alluded to, the Commission, since 2010, we have our Power Switch shopping website. It's not just a shopping website, it's also an important consumer education tool. It's basically, we have provided a neutral source of information that consumers can trust to educate themselves about how to shop, what consumer protections are in place, explanations of fixed and variable pricing, disclosure statements, etc. But they can also then proceed to shop and compare offers. They do this by simply entering their home zip code, and then a whole list of products from various suppliers will be generated, including all sorts of products, fixed, variable, renewables, etc. And the website features fairly sophisticated filtering options that consumers can use to target what kind of product they are, in fact, interested in buying. Now, let's move on to the consumer protections that we have in place. Before going into detail, I just want to update everyone on some of the important current status of door-to-door marketing in Pennsylvania. Back last March 2020, as the pandemic hit, the Commission issued an emergency order prohibiting the door-to-door sales of all energy marketing services. That ban remains in effect, and it will remain in effect during the duration of the governor's proclamation of disaster emergency, unless otherwise directed by the Commission. It's also important to note, most of the rules I'm going to be talking about here shortly are about residential customers, but this door-to-door marketing ban applies to all customer classes, residential, commercial, and industrial. And speaking of door-to-door, at some point as we move out of the pandemic and the governor's emergency proclamations expire, door-to-door activity will likely resume. And I just want to touch on some of the important rules we have in place safeguarding the market when it comes to door-to-door. One of the first important rules is we make sure suppliers are aware of the fact that they, the licensed supplier, are responsible for any fraudulent, deceptive, or unlawful marketing acts performed by anyone working for them, whether it's an employee, an agent, a vendor, a contractor, etc. It doesn't matter. It is the licensed supplier that we, the Commission, will hold responsible for anything that goes wrong out there. Door-to-door agents must have criminal background checks, including a Megan's Law check, prior to conducting any marketing activity with the public. And any sales that an agent makes has to be verified by some sort of outside presence, either like a phone call or some other verification procedure apart from the agent to verify that the customer did indeed understand what they were buying and fully consent to having their service switched to the supplier. Also, when marketing door-to-door, agents have to be clearly identified, display ID. That explains who they work for. They have to make affirmative statements to the effect that they do not work for the local utility or the commission. They cannot tell a customer or suggest to a customer that you have to choose, because no customer has to choose in our market. This is important. All agents must comply with local ordinances. In Pennsylvania, municipalities have primary jurisdiction over this kind of activity that goes on in their communities. And whatever rules there are in place must be respected by the supplier. We do have hours for door-to-door marketing activity. It varies by season. In the warm weather months, it's 9 to 8 p.m. In the cold weather season, it ends at 7 p.m. Again, if the local municipality has a stricter ordinance, that stricter ordinance must be obeyed. Plus, we also require suppliers to notify us here at the commission when and where they do their door-to-door activity. An agent has to leave the residence if asked to do so, and must respect requests not to be visited again. They have to speak the customer's language and also have to provide information to the customer in writing. Now, we also have rules on telemarketing. First of all, we remind the suppliers that in Pennsylvania, telemarketing is largely governed by our Office of Attorney General and their Consumer Protection Unit, and that their laws, the Telemarketing and Consumer Fraud and Abuse Prevention Acts, must be obeyed. They must comply with federal and state do not call lists. And again, same as with door-to-door, an agent that calls a potential customer has to identify themselves by name, the company they're working for, and the reason for the telephone call. And again, they cannot suggest that they're working on behalf of the local utility. And again, they cannot suggest that the customer has to choose a supplier. Now, these rules have been in place for about 10 years. We were one of the first states to develop comprehensive supplier marketing regulations. We recognize now that around 10 years has passed, it's probably time to look at these rules again and update them to take into account the evolving market. So we've already started that process. We have reached out to the stakeholders, soliciting their suggestions and advice as to what we should look at as we look at these rules again. And the suggestions we got, are asking us to, look at robocalling, spoofing, maybe more robust reporting requirements about the use of vendors, also direct mail and electronic mail, and maybe updating sales verification procedures to take into account new technologies. The commission, sometime in the future here, we plan on launching a formal rulemaking to, again, more formally look at the rules, to update them and keep them current. Also on rules that have been updated, we just last year in 2020 updated our important residential disclosure regulations. And these disclosure regulations are the regulations that govern what a supplier must disclose in writing to a customer when a customer enrolls with them. Obviously, we're looking here to provide greater price transparency that would hopefully encourage residential customers to shop. Among the updates we made last year, the new rules now require that introductory pricing must be clearly identified. And a supplier, if they're offering an introductory product, have to provide the customer with both the price during the introductory period and the price after the introductory period. With variable price products, as Chairman Powelson mentioned, back in 2014 in the wake of polar vortex, we adopted a whole new set of rules concerning variable prices. We have further enhanced those rules in 2020 and requiring now the suppliers to provide the factors that the supplier uses to establish the variable price, and that kind of information has to be in a larger font on the disclosure so that it is noticed. And a 24-month history of that price must be made available to the customer. Another important change we made last year to the rules is that we have now banned early termination fees in the last 30 days of a customer's service contract. That means during the last 30 days of the contract, the customer is now free to go out and shop and switch if they so wish without fear of getting hit by an early termination fee. This is the supplier disclosure contract summary. This was one of the more important reforms we did back in 2014. This was in recognition that a customer may not read a disclosure statement. After all, how many customers actually do read their disclosures? But the hope is maybe they'll at least read or look at a contract summary that is in a simple box format that highlights the key information they need. And that key information being things like the price, obviously. Also, if there's any fees involved, such as termination fees, the length of the contract. A key change we made to this last year is at the very bottom there. Now in this contract summary, the supplier has to inform customers of their 3-day right of rescission. This is a very important right for residential customers that when they enter into a deal with the supplier, they have 3 business days to back out of that deal without penalty if they so wish. We also, the Commission over the years has recognized that low-income customers need additional protections. So the Commission, through various proceedings in recent years, has put in place additional protections for those customers. Those that participate in utility customer assistance programs are basically now prohibited from enrolling into a supplier product that costs more than the utility default service. And of course, with any rules, a key component of any rules are the oversight and enforcement of those rules. We actively monitor the competitive market through the informal and formal complaints that consumers file with the Commission at our Bureau of Consumer Services and with our administrative law judges. And our staff, especially in our Bureau of Consumer Services, routinely engages suppliers in informal regulatory compliance concerns. If those informal methods are not effective, more formal and formal enforcement mechanisms are available, including our Commission's Bureau of Investigation and Enforcement. Our prosecutors in that bureau can get involved and pursue complaints against suppliers and have done so. We encourage any consumer with questions or problems to contact our Bureau of Consumer Services through our hotline. You see the number there, 1-800-692-7380, or online via our website. And yeah, that pretty much concludes my presentation. Again, we're having questions at the end, and I'll certainly be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you for your attention this afternoon.
Dan, thank you for that informative presentation. And again, thank you for the work that you're doing at the Commission to support retail choice here in the Commonwealth. Now it's my pleasure to recognize Christina Montgomery, Director of Retail Policy with Vistra Energy. I want to take a little bit of moderator liberty here. I believe that my good friend Jim Burke, who runs TXU Energy Services, we were one of the first, I think under my watch, we approved your preliminary application back in the mid-2000s to enter into the marketplace. So it's great to have you guys invested here in Pennsylvania, a really good company, and look forward, Christina, to your presentation here this afternoon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words this afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Montgomery. I am the Director of Retail Policy at Vistra Corp, and happy to be here with you all today. So first, I just want to start with a very brief overview of who we are. So here are some facts about the Vistra family of companies. Vistra is a leading integrated retail and power generation company. So focusing on our retail business, we serve approximately 5 million retail customers in 20 states and the District of Columbia. On our generation side, we have approximately 39,000 megawatts of generation capacity, and that includes 3 natural gas plants here in Pennsylvania that provides about 1,900 megawatts. So today, I really want to talk about how Vistra views the customer relationship and the retail choice market. And so first, we're going to start off with a discussion of why customers choose a retail provider. Now you can see from the first graph, price savings is obviously a large factor in why customers initially choose to shop, but it's certainly not the only reason. Customers are also looking at different incentives, whether they trust the brand and certain products and services that are only offered by a retail supplier. Now, how we retain customers is different than how we initially start that relationship. On the right-hand side, you'll see, reasons customers would choose to remain. And what you'll see is that the value proposition, the reason that customers stay, relates a lot more to their overall customer experience. Customers certainly look at value, but they're more inclined to stay with a retail provider if they have a positive overall experience. And you'll see that that's one of the key factors. So as far as how Vistra is positioned, we really want to differentiate ourselves in these markets. And that's why we really do place a high emphasis on building customer loyalty and trust and providing excellent customer service. And the foundation of a competitive market is really that the choice is with the consumer, and suppliers need to compete to win customers and also to retain customers. And that's really drives everything we do here at Vistra. So why the lesson in how the customer thinks about their retail provider? Really because it's the foundation for how we bring products and services to market. Our goal is to differentiate ourselves, and that's done through unique offers, that's done through customer engagement, and that's done through mobile technologies. And we really think about this in terms of choice, convenience, and control. So first and foremost, we need to offer products that provide value to customers, and we offer a wide range of products and services. This includes everything from fixed price products that provide certainty to solar and wind products that allow customers to support renewable energy. And we currently offer over 50 renewable energy products. We also want to provide customers with convenience and control. So convenience means giving the customers the ability to interact with their supplier in the way that best suits them. So for example, if a customer wants an agent to be available 24/7, they can select a supplier that offers that level of customer service. We also want our customers to have control over their electricity usage. We give them the tools they need to manage their usage, make payments, and receive alerts from us. And we will dive into each one of these individually. So a fundamental principle of competitive markets is the ability for the customer to choose. And that's why we really push ourselves to develop products that resonate with customers. A really good example of this is our Free Nights and Solar Days product. And I want to highlight the evolution of this product and how it is really adapted to better meet consumer needs. So we launched Free Nights in 2012, and this was really to take advantage of smart meter infrastructure. And we began by offering customers free electricity at night and a fixed price during the daytime hours. Now, based on customer feedback, we slowly evolved this program, and we started offering free nights and weekends. And then we also heard our customers ask for a product that was more customizable. So in 2016, we actually allowed customers to start choosing when their free nights began, so they could pick the time that best suited their household and their needs. Finally, we heard our customers ask for more renewable options. So we prepared a Free Nights and Solar Days, and that combines our very popular Free Nights product with solar electricity during the day. And this product is actually supported by our own solar farm. So over the last decade, the number of our customers on green plans has grown significantly. And I think that's really just a testament to how the market is evolving over time. And again, this evolution was really driven by listening to our customers' interests and listening to their needs. Another benefit of a product like Free Nights and Solar Days is it encourages customers to move and shift their usage to time when there is less demand on the grid. So that benefits the system as well. To offer a product like this, we really need three different things. So the first is we need smart meter data. We also need to make sure that all transactions, that means billing and usage transactions, are settled using actual individualized customer data. And then the third thing we need is supplier consolidated billing, which is where the retail supplier is responsible for sending the bill. So we have the first two of those things in Pennsylvania, but the third thing, supplier consolidated billing, is really key to educating customers and getting them to understand their usage. So once the customer has selected the product, we then want to focus on how we engage with our customers throughout their customer lifecycle. Our primary focus is meeting customers where they want to be met. And so by allowing customers to choose how they interact with us in a way that best suits their lifestyle, we build that loyalty and trust. As you can see from the graph on the right, the way customers are interacting with their service providers has really changed over time. It used to be that if you had a question, you could pick up the phone and call the company. But today, more and more customers are comfortable using websites, chat, mobile apps, and other means to get their questions answered. So we're actually seeing few customers call into our call centers to speak with an agent, and more customers using online and mobile options. And the great thing about this is that the preference is really with the customer. For me personally, I have children at home, so I try to avoid talking on the phone at all costs. But for someone else that really wants to speak with a live agent and wants that agent available 24/7, we also offer that level of service. Finally, we also want to give customers control over their energy usage, and we do that in a number of ways. One thing we can do is send alerts to our customers to let them know that based on their usage, they might be facing a higher bill at the end of the billing cycle. Our digital platforms also allow us to continually educate customers on their energy usage so they can understand how and when they are using electricity, and also how this relates to the bills that they pay every month. And this really gives customers complete control over their energy usage. We also offer a mobile app in markets where we do handle the billing relationship with the customer. And retail suppliers are really focused on meeting customer needs, whether that's allowing them to change the date that their bill is due to align with when they get paid, or if they need to split payments or make a different payment arrangement with the retail supplier. So in more developed competitive markets, customer focus really shifts away from price and moves towards superior customer experience. So we are constantly evaluating how to deliver more value to customers and ensure that they get a personalized and seamless experience. The final note I'll make is that we believe there are several keys to a well-functioning market. The primary feature is an environment where the choice really lies with the customer. We also believe that there is a need for accountability for retail suppliers to ensure that customers who are in the retail market are having a positive overall customer experience. And then finally, we also need to provide retail suppliers with the ability to develop those strong and lasting relationships with their customers, because these kind of tools really encourage and provide incentives to suppliers to innovate and offer new products and provide superior customer service. So with that, I'll conclude, and I thank you for your time and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for your investment here in the Pennsylvania retail market space. I love the adage, choice, convenience, and control. I think I once used the frame or the theme, quality, value, convenience. And someone said, that's QVC. And I said, yes, it is. And it's amazing how, again, to your point, how customers have benefited from not only choice, but convenience and control of that choice. So applaud you and your market innovation. It's really an honor to recognize now for our next presentation, Rich Spilkey, with Principal of Retail Analytics with Constellation Energy. Constellation was an early market participant, doing a phenomenal job with some of their national branding, more recently with the NHL, the PGA Tour, and really one of the focuses of this company has been a steadfast commitment all the way up to their chairman, Mayo Shattuck, in supporting competition policy. So with that, it's an honor to have with us today, Rich Spilkey with Constellation Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. I'm glad to be here as well. Thanks for the introduction. I have a number of slides to share regarding Pennsylvania specifically, which will build upon some of the data points that were brought up by you and some of the other speakers. The first slide that I'm sharing on the screen represents what we call the state price sort, is what we call it. And so today we're celebrating the 25-year anniversary of the legislation in Pennsylvania, which was 1996. But the actual shopping and switching occurred in 1998. The majority of it began in that year. And so we're using 1998 as the baseline and going all the way through the most recent information available on the EIA website, which is 2019. And you can see on this slide on the very far right, the Pennsylvania statistic is right there. Pennsylvania wins, is what I'm trying to say. Pennsylvania has had the least price increase all the way back that many years, 21 years or so. From that point, they've had about a 25% price increase, and that's the least in the entire country, whether they're competitive or monopoly, doesn't matter. Pennsylvania has had the least price increase of any other state over this period of time. Looking at residential customers specifically using the same criteria, Pennsylvania residential customers, they didn't win the prize, but they still did pretty well. And in this case, the Pennsylvania customers are looking at about a 40% price increase over this 21-year period, but the average monopoly state at the same time has seen a 64% increase. So the Pennsylvania residential customers have benefited significantly as a consequence of having restructured markets. Looking at the data a little bit differently and looking at it more from a year-by-year perspective, again, we're still looking at the same 21-year time period, but now we're looking at the average price increase year by year and taking the average of those price increases using 1998 again as the baseline. And sure enough, looking at all customers in Pennsylvania, the all sector point of view, the Pennsylvania has done better price performance wise than the average competitive jurisdiction, of which Pennsylvania, of course, is a member. And the competitive jurisdictions have done better than the monopoly jurisdictions, as you can see by this chart, but Pennsylvania has done even better than average. Looking at the next slide, same thing, except drilling in on the residential customer specifically. We can see here that, again, the competitive jurisdictions in green have done better than the monopoly jurisdictions in the black bar, but the residential customers in Pennsylvania have done better still from a price performance statistic point of view. So now another view that we like to use is talking about potential monetary savings. And this slide, I think, says a lot, and it also highlights what you, Mr. Paulson, said earlier about how Pennsylvania price performance is now better than the national average. I heard you say that in your opening remarks, and sure enough, this graph confirms that fact. But what I want to spend a minute on this slide and explain what it's trying to say. So if you look at the red line from 1990 all the way to the present, so this is about a 30-year look. The red line are the actual prices paid, all sector, all customers combined in Pennsylvania. That's what they actually paid in cents per kilowatt hour year by year. If you look at the dashed blue line, that's what the 49 contiguous states in the United States paid, year by year, weighted average, across the board over that same time frame. So then if you break the graph up into the prior to restructuring, so you see I drew a vertical line there in 1998. And if you look at that line, it's pretty clear, and I think this was said during one of the speaker's remarks, that the Pennsylvania folks were paying around 16% more than the national average every year prior to restructuring. So if you take that average 16% difference that they were paying when they were a monopoly state, just like all the states were monopoly states during the 90s, and then you project and just assume that if they would have left the same regime in place, the same regulatory structure in place, the same everything in place, and they would have not gone to restructuring, and they would have continued to have a 16% premium over the national average, then they would have been paying the prices shown in light blue. So we're just basically saying they would have continued to act like the same, monopoly structure that they had in the 10 years previous. And that's the light blue. However, they didn't. They did implement choice. They did implement competition. They did implement competitive markets and a whole different structure. And so the difference between the blue, the light blue, and the red is the savings that the customers experienced as a, maybe not entirely because of competition, but largely because of the competitive market structure that changed the price regulation from, to allow competitive forces to, affect the prices rather than regulatory models. And so if you add up the money over that time period, it's a big number. It's $41 billion from a statewide all sector perspective. Again, using the same methodology, but just zeroing in on the residential customers in Pennsylvania, we see that, of that 41 billion, about 11 billion of that savings has accrued to the residential sector. And then my final slide just kind of sums it all up together. So if you start back in 1998 and then you begin the process in 1999, as this slide shows, the total savings year by year cumulative over this period of time has been about $30 billion for the business customers, and then again around almost 11 billion for the residential customers combined. So Pennsylvania business and residential customers are benefiting significantly as a consequence of restructuring and allowing choice, allowing competition, allowing competitive market forces to determine the price structure. And I think that they're hitting a grand slam home run, and Pennsylvania should be proud of what they've accomplished. So that wraps up my comments, and we can move on to the next speaker, and I'll be happy to take questions later.
Rich, thank you for your presentation. Very powerful slide deck. And also thank you for the baseball analogy, because pretty soon we're going to be hopefully having opening day here finally. So now it's my pleasure to welcome the chairman of the Pennsylvania RESA chapter, a good friend, Tony Casati with IGS Energy. After Tony's presentation, we're going to do a little Q&A. And Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much, Rob. Appreciate that.
My pleasure.
Give me a second here and I'll share my screen with folks. Everybody see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Good. So today I'm going to talk about the RESA support of retail market enhancements that have been introduced into the legislature here recently. As everybody knows, RESA is in fact devoted to working with all of the stakeholders, whether it's on a regulatory side or the legislative side, and we do in fact support a vibrant competitive retail market for all residential, commercial, and industrial customers. So with that, we are committed to supporting initiatives that will enhance the retail energy market, and in particular, legislation that has been recently introduced into the Pennsylvania General Assembly. The first one being Senate Bill 277, and then the next one being House Bill 548. And I'll go into a little bit of detail as to what each one of those represents. SB 77 in the co-sponsorship memorandum talked about improving the transparency and options for consumers of electric and natural gas and accountability for retail suppliers. It was referred to the Consumer Protection Committee on February 24th, and the legislation basically addresses three specific retail enhancement protocols. The first one being facilities to facilitates the process of consumers to switch from default service using additional forms of identification. The second one being the identifying the costs associated with providing default energy supply to consumers and appropriately allocating the cost between the supply and distribution rates. We sometimes refer to that as unbundling. And then the third is suppliers will be required to pass an online training and education exam and be certified by the Public Utility Commission. And that's for suppliers to ensure that they are adhering to the consumer protection rules that are in place at the commission. So with respect to additional forms of identification, we're looking to allow customers to select or change electric or gas suppliers by providing personal identifiable information rather than utility account number. As most of you already know, in order for a supplier to enroll a consumer into their service, they have to have that sacred account number, which sometimes is very difficult to obtain. And customers just don't know that number off the top of their head. It's obviously on their bill. And, who among us carries our utility bill around with us? So with that, we're looking for the commission to require the local distribution company to modify the electronic data interchange transactions that accept a series of personally identifiable data elements, whether that be the last 4 digits of a social security number, a telephone number associated with the utility account number, or some date of birth, or date of birth in their premise or street address, to identify that the customer's account and process supplier's enrollment as required. The last point here is that we're looking to verify the customer's identity, and suppliers are going to be required to provide a government-issued or alternative form of identification to us in order to enroll without the account number. So that's the first item with respect to the legislation. The next one is what we classify as unbundling, and that is to require the local distribution company to identify all costs associated with providing default service and appropriately allocating the cost between supply and distribution rates. The commission shall require the distribution company to conduct a cost of service study in the first rate case filed after the effective date of the legislation, and to identify those costs to provide default service and appropriately allocate those costs between with respect to the default service rates. Specific costs are in fact identified in the legislation. I won't go into any great detail with respect to what those items are, but most of them are the typical ones that you would expect. For example, whether they're financial or physical, the procurement cost, the billing system cost, customer service costs, working capital, etc. The second category would in fact be indirect costs. Those would be costs that support both distribution and default service functions of the utility. And the primary reason behind looking to get this legislation passed is to have a more equitable and fairer comparison of the price to compare between supplier rates and utility rates. Right now, that's an apples to oranges comparison that we feel needs to be corrected in the marketplace. And this is one way of enhancing the retail market in order to have a much fairer comparison. The last item in this particular bill is the training and certification. And it's an ongoing training and certification process. The objective of this part of the legislation is to create an ongoing training and certification process for suppliers to better ensure that suppliers are knowledgeable of the applicable statutes, the regulations, and other requirements which would put accountability and place accountability on their behavior. This undertaking could help avoid non-compliance issues by ensuring that all suppliers have a working knowledge of the rules and protections that have been set up for consumers. The purpose of the training or retraining would be to ensure that each and every supplier is familiar with and has working knowledge of the consumer protection rules and requirements. Retraining for existing licenses could occur and be implemented as the commission deems necessary. And then obviously, and then lastly, the cost of such undertaking would be, could be in fact covered by either increased assessments or fees associated with suppliers making application for a license. The next piece of legislation is HB 548, and that is classified as the Energy Consumer Choice Enhancement Act, which will provide consumers with additional tools to choose products and services that they want from competitive suppliers. That particular piece of legislation was in fact referred to the Consumer Affairs Committee on February 17th, and it also addresses 3 specific topics of the discussion. It provides transparency by allowing the consumer to receive a bill directly from their chosen supplier rather than through the intermediary. And we sometimes, or most of the time, classify that as supplier consolidated billing. This piece of legislation also has the identification of the cost in unbundling, as well as the authority to have the commission authorize additional forms of identification that suppliers can use to enroll customers. I'll just talk about the one piece that is unique to this particular piece of legislation, that's supplier consolidated billing. You know, implementation of SCB, and I believe Christina had mentioned this in her presentation as well, that basically the implementation would enable customers to receive a single bill from their supplier that includes charges for both the supplier's supply charges as well as utilities tariff delivery charges. The implementation of SCB would significantly level the playing field for retail suppliers. And we would no longer would suppliers have to rely on our biggest competitor to send out monthly bills and manage the collections for their customers. i.e. that is the utilities. Next, the implementation of supplier consolidated billing will certainly enhance Pennsylvania's retail energy market. In this regard, SCB is directly in line with the purposes of the Electric Choice Act, which included establishing customer choice at competitive retail markets and providing economic benefits to the consumer. The implementation of SCB would benefit Pennsylvania consumers big time. They would gain access to more innovative products and services, including the enhanced ability to utilize tools that enable them to budget their energy dollars more effectively and manage their energy needs more efficiently. SCB would certainly allow suppliers to forge long-term relationships, and that's one of the things that's lacking at this juncture. Suppliers are not able to have that long-term relationship because in most cases, our name shows up on a utility bill, and sometimes it's buried on the third page of the document, and customers just forget who their supplier is. This will allow us to forge those long-term relationships and be able to have a relationship with the consumer on an ongoing basis. With SCB, we'll be able to provide customers the opportunity to receive a suite of value-added benefits, such as home security, HVAC systems, maintenance, surge protection, demand response products, energy efficiency and monitoring services, and smart thermostats. And that's something that we're not able to do at this moment because, quite frankly, we can't place those items on the customer's bill through the utility. And then lastly, you would enable a direct relationship between suppliers and our customers, which would obviously enhance the overall shopping experience and certainly be greatly improve the customer satisfaction and experience that they have. So with that, I'm going to close and turn it back over to Rob and/or Tracy with respect to questions. And just wanted to mention to everyone that RESA, in fact, is a resource. So if there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact us. And thanks again for your opportunity today.
Thanks, Tony. We are very closing into the end of our webinar, but I think we have time for just a couple of questions. So one of the questions is to Mr. Mumford. Do you see the commission relaxing the door-to-door ban anytime soon? As you know, it's tied to the governor's emergency order, which has recently been extended to mid-May. Any chance the commission could order a relaxation at this time?
Yeah, the door-to-door ban, the timing of that is tied to the governor's emergency proclamation. And as you noted, at the end of February, he just renewed that for an additional 90 days. Now, that's not to say, the commission can also act to end it sooner if it so chose, or perhaps even extend it further. But at this point, I'm not aware of any movement in that direction. Again, at any time, anyone could petition the commission for a modification or relaxation of the ban. Over the past year, we have entertained a number of those petitions. We've rejected some, but we have modified the ban in response to some of those petitions by allowing sales to occur at outdoor public events, for example. So yes, I can't say there is any imminent ending to the ban in sight, but again, at any time, someone could file something seeking such an action from the commission.
Thank you. Another question, in regard to supplier training and certification legislation, is there any national organization which would do the training? In other words, how do you see this implemented?
Yeah, Tracy, I'll take that question. To my knowledge, there is no national organization that does this. This actually came about as a byproduct of some activity that was going on in Maryland last year. And I had run across a website with the Ethics Commission with respect to a lobbying registration where the Ethics Commission forces lobbyists to go through a training and education process to certify that they are in fact familiar with the rules and familiar with the practices of the Ethics Commission to ensure that they don't violate them in any way. That gave us the thought that maybe similar legislation in Maryland and then obviously Pennsylvania would help in that regard. So we're supporting this legislation to be able to maybe have a stakeholder group or some form thereof with the commission to research this and implement such a program. That way we can make sure that all suppliers are familiar with the consumer protections, as Dan had alluded to earlier in his presentation, and put to bed some of the issues that come up with respect to things like violations of door-to-door marketing and telemarketing violations. That's our goal. As we indicated earlier, RISA, in fact, is very supportive of consumer protections in any market we're in. And this is just one way of buttoning that issue up and hoping that all suppliers, in fact, adhere to the protections that are available.
Thanks, Tony. We have a couple of questions relating to Texas. So is it possible that Pennsylvania could experience the same prolonged outages that happened in Texas last month? Many of you have an opinion on that, maybe?
Well, look, none of us on this call could have predicted a pandemic. So, anything's possible, but let's look at the reality. And Texas is, look, year over year, #1 business climate in the state, more companies moving to the state. But energy markets, the conversation that will probably come up in Texas is predictable, the blending of a potential capacity market construct. Look, many critics would say razor thin reserve margins when you can have 100-degree days coupled with what happened with this particular weather event might not be adequate enough. And there hence the discussion around building up those reserve margins and adopting a capacity market. And I think that, again, what I learned from my FERC experience was the regional differences within these organized markets. ERCOT is not a FERC regulated entity, and nor am I advocating for that. But the reality is, as I said in my opening remarks, look, we have our battle scars too. And I think going forward for Texas is we don't need the legislature overreacting. Very troubled right now, the conversation with the resignations at the commission to put the commission under the Texas Railroad Commission. I am not a firm advocate for that. I think it would be a setback. And so we've got a number of moving parts right now in Texas. And I know my friends, especially from Vistra, know it better than I do. But now more than ever, I don't think we want to abandon competition policy in Texas.
Thank you, former Chairman Powelson. In that same vein, or can any of you discuss how suppliers help customers during events like Winter Storm Uri?
Hi, Tracy. I'm happy to take that one. Especially during the winter storm and during the pandemic, we've certainly seen increased requests for assistance from our customers. And because we manage that billing relationship in Texas, it really puts retail suppliers in a very unique way to be able to help customers. So, we quickly implemented a lot of voluntary measures, including fee waivers, extended payment plans to help customers immediately. And then, we also have a voluntary payment assistance program called TXU Energy Aid. And it's actually one of the largest bill assistance programs in the country. And it is funded primarily by donations from Vistra and its employees. And, we've been able to help over 500,000 customers by providing about $100 million in assistance. So our goal is really proactive outreach to customers, because we have that billing relationship. We can see which customers may be struggling, who would benefit from being on a different electricity plan, and then really educating them and working with them to the various options that are available to them.
Thank you, Christina. Can any of you discuss what are the benefits to the consumer for supplier consolidated billing?
Yeah, Tracy, this is Tony. I'll go ahead and respond to that. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that supplier consolidated billing would allow us to offer those products and services we have available that are over and above the routine commodity cost. A lot of us have those products available right now as we speak. Our problem is we cannot get those products and services to the consumer because we have no way of billing them. We are hindered by the fact that we are relegated a certain amount of space on the utility bill to mark our to bill our commodity services with no ability to add anything to that. So as a result, the need for supplier consolidated billing is paramount with respect to being able to bill the customer for those services, particularly in an environment where the customer is becoming more sophisticated, more educated on their energy needs. There are additional products that they want to take advantage of, and we just can't get those to the market, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just pick up on that because it goes back to the discussion around innovation. I remember meeting with the team in Baltimore at Constellation. I mean, Constellation's, robust participant, but I mean, their business model was, look, if you need help with your rooftop solar, managing your SREC credits, we can do all that for you. And that's really, to Tony's point, that's where the relationship is headed. As I heard earlier, choice, convenience, and control. And customers, they're, unfortunately, we're still captive customers. We get a utility bill, and that utility bill, thankfully, the one thing we did do was change the font on that bill. Chairman Cawley, believe it or not, changed the font. So it wasn't just a little, 2-point font on the bill, and we required the logo. Now that was 10 years ago. Now I think is the right time to have the conversation about changing the relationship. And I think it starts with consolidated billing now more than ever. I mean, there's still this relationship with the electric distribution company. It's never going to go away, but I think people should have the freedom to have choice when it comes to their bill coming from their supplier.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Tracy, I think, from a consumer protection, and Chairman, you're exactly right. From a consumer protection standpoint, we think supplier consolidated billing really makes the retail supplier more accountable. From month one of service, the customer is receiving a bill from their retail supplier, clearly identifies the company that they picked, the product they selected, their monthly charges. And we ultimately believe, customers should pay the company with which they're doing business, and SCB would allow us to accomplish that.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Rob. And I think we have time for one additional question. Can anyone explain the available products and services that suppliers offer the consumer, and how would the consumer know that those options are available?
Well, Tracy, I think I mentioned earlier that there is a whole array of products and services, and mostly geared towards the energy efficiency prospect. In terms of how they find that those things are available, I mean, the PUC website that Dan had alluded to earlier has the ability to add to that website those products and services. Each and every one of us has our own website where we advertise and suggest to the consumer what they have available that they could take advantage of. You know, in addition to that, you know, just the overall our overall marketing efforts also allude to that as well. I could tell you that from an IGS perspective, for example, anytime we do any marketing, whether it's through mail, whether it's through telemarketing, et cetera, we're always offering those value-added services to the consumer for them to take advantage of. So that's the way we're bringing that to the market at this juncture. And certainly, if there are other ways that other folks can think of, that would be they can offer. That would be great.
Thank you, Tony. Well, this is coming to the conclusion of our webinar today. We want to thank everyone for attending. Thank you all, panelists and moderator, for joining us today. And we hope that this has been educational and of value to you. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.